Time for another of these exciting videos for you. I have a lot of fun making them. I hope you have fun watching them, and I hope they enhance your understanding of what we're trying to do that particular week, and the overall, I hope they enhance the overall goal of the course, which is to increase your appreciation and enjoyment of literature. Okay, so I hope so. I hope these videos add to all of that. Last week we talked about narrative poetry, excuse me, and of course, I mentioned to you last week that my wife and I were both kind of under the weather, and so I used an old video in there for you, and I apologize for that, but it was just necessary last week. This week, now you can tell that this is a current one because you can see a date on my shirt here. It does say 2020. My granddaughter designed these shirts for a turkey trot, so I thought, yeah, this is pretty cool to have to wear this, and I'm making this the night before Thanksgiving, so turkey trot is pretty appropriate. But anyway, last week we talked about narrative poetry that tells a story. Okay, and then you wrote some very good essays about poems that told a story and how those stories many times got to you individually. Okay, so I was very much pleased with what I found. I will say there was one student who really was not writing personally at all. It really seemed like hers was researched, and she was borrowing information from critics or somebody to write her paper. That's not what we want. I would think that all of you would know all of that long before now. So I was disappointed in that kind of thing. And actually, that person has done that now a couple of times. If it happens again on these poems, then I'm just going to give the person a really bad grade on the paper. Okay, so if that's you, then don't do it again. Okay, but anyway, moving from narrative poetry to lyric poetry, and this camera looks like it's having some problems, but it does look like it's running. It looks like every so often it stops taking pictures, but I can see the timer is still going, so it still works. Okay, so anyway, get yourself a pen and paper or pencil and paper. If you don't have one in front of you now, make sure you have one, because I'm going to give you titles of poems and pages that the poems are on for you to read as we talk about lyric poems, okay? But I don't want you to think that narrative poetry and lyric poetry are the only two kinds of poetry. There is also didactic poetry, for example. Didactic poetry is meant to teach a lesson, okay? So that's another kind of poetry that we won't really be looking at, but there's a lot of poems that can be didactic, I suppose, in the sense of teaching lessons. Here's your video question. Well, no, I can't give you your video question quite yet. Lyric poetry is primarily designed to move the emotions, okay? Lyric poetry is emotional, so the poet is trying to get inside his emotions, and the poet is also trying to get inside the reader's emotions. The poem is only going to mean something to the reader if it gets inside their emotions. So, for instance, the poem Dog's Death meant a lot to a lot of you because a lot of you had pets that you had lost, and so that poem meant a lot to a lot of you. Okay, and Casey at the bat. Those of you who have played your share of baseball certainly could relate to Casey at the bat. Okay, and there were lots of other poems that you could tie into. So those were narrative, but in lyric poems, again, we're looking to delve into the emotions. Okay, we're looking to the poet is looking to get you inside your emotions by getting inside her own emotions. Okay, so lyric poetry by its nature is frequently subjective. Okay, because somebody can't really know what's going on in your emotions. They can know what's going on in their own emotions, okay? But they can't know what's going on in your emotions. So there's a subjectivity to it, okay? And this is important too. Lyric poetry is usually very imaginative. A poet wants to help get inside his emotions and your emotions and his own subjectivity and your subjectivity by delving into the imagination. So the poet wants you to take the thoughts that might be in the poems and put them in your own imagination and allow them to explode, to take wherever your imagination can take you, okay? So besides other things about lyric poetry, it's emotional, it's subjective, it's imaginative. Much of the time, lyric poetry is the kind of thing that we experienced so much before with poetry, in the sense of the rhyming and the meter and all that kind of stuff. But again, we're not taking that approach. We're looking for you to read it pretty much by the punctuation, but also, and I'll say this in the lesson, it's much easier to really get into a poem to hear it, okay? So I suggest that you read poems to yourself out loud, okay? So, I mean, you can have somebody else read them to you, except to some degree, then you're going to be affected by the way they interpret that poem. So I think the best way is for you to read it yourself, you know. It's important for you that you get to where you can really kind of concentrate on what you're doing there. It's hard to read and get into poems, especially lyric poems, things that are in emotion, when you're in a situation where there are distractions. So try to get away from distraction. You know, lock yourself in the bathroom. I'm sorry, but you know, for a lot of us, that's the only place you can get a little peace and quiet anyway. So, okay. So that I'm going to go through some poems, talk about some poems, but here's your video question for this week, and I want you to email me the answer to this one. From what we've talked about from lyric poems and what you already knew about narrative poems, can a poem be both narrative and lyric? And if so, how or why? And if not, why not? Okay? So that's your video question. Email that to me, please. Okay? And of course, anytime you don't email me an answer to a video question, you lose points, or you don't gain points. Okay? So there's not a negativity to it. There's a lack of a positivity, and of course your final grade is based on all the points you accumulate. These medals behind me are medals from some of the marathons that I've run. So it's kind of cool. My son gave me a neat holder for them, you know. So that's what these medals are that are behind me. And it seemed like an appropriate place to sit when I was going to wear a turkey trot shirt. Yeah, turkey trot's only 5 miles, and a marathon is 26.2. But you know, it's still a cool place. And actually, there's like one of these that's very special to me, because 3 years ago I broke my tibia, fibula, shattered my ankle, and then a month later I had some cancer surgery. But then a month after that, my granddaughter called me up and said, "Papa, the Disney Marathon is on my 17th birthday. Can you be ready to do that with me?" And so on her 17th birthday, just a year after I shattered all this stuff and had surgery, I have 3 screws in my ankle and a plate down the front. But you know, I'm still a runner. And I run pretty much every day, and I run, you know, not a lot of distance now, but maybe 35 miles a week, not a lot. But anyway, so that's what these medals are back here, if you were wondering. Okay, so some poems that I want to talk about this week, and this is stuff you need to write down, because I don't put these in the assignment for you. So if you don't write these down, then you're going to not know where they are. One of the poems that I have down, and maybe my favorite of them all, is the poem Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. And emotion just seeps through this one. So this one I'll read to you, and this will be the only one, okay? "It was many and many a year ago, when a king that a maiden there lived, whom you may know the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me." She was a child, and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. Yes, this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of the cloud by night, chilling my Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I see the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the side of the sea. Okay, so that's Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee, and you can just feel the emotion through that. That's on 954 in your book, page 954. Okay, and the name again was Annabel Lee. And these aren't all love poems, okay, but that one is just, Poe was such a great poet and would have loved to have spent his life doing poetry, but he couldn't make money on it. Okay. Another poem that's a really powerful poem that's about death and not giving in to death is Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. Okay. And that is on page 681 in your book. Okay. There is an Emily Dickinson poem, and it's a pretty cool poem. It's short, but it's really pretty cool. Tell All the Truth, but Tell It Slant. It's on page 738 in your book. Okay. The Road Not Taken, a poem that you've all heard before by Robert Frost, is on page 760. You've heard that poem before. Two roads diverged in yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long, I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps a better claim. You've all read that poem before. That's on page 760, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And there's another Robert Frost poem that you probably have encountered before. It's called Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, and it's on page 768. Okay, and then there's a beautiful poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning that actually sometimes you hear parts of in like wedding ceremonies and stuff. How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and it's on 929 in your book. And My Father Teaches Me to Dream is on 903 in the book. And then The Unknown Citizen is on 922 in your book. Okay? So those are all some poems that I'd like you to read through and to choose a couple of, two or three. I think the assignment says 3, but I haven't really decided on that yet, but I think that's what we'll say is 3. Maybe I'll say 2. I don't know. Maybe it'll say 2 or 3, whatever you want. Anyway, hopefully, you've had a good week. Tonight's the night before Thanksgiving. I wish you all a grand Thanksgiving. This writing assignment will be due next week, Wednesday, but I wanted to get it up today to make sure you have plenty of time to work on it, okay? So, you know where to get me if you have any questions, and get me the answers to the video questions, and then, of course, comment on each other's poems, because I didn't see as many comments as usual on narrative poems last week, okay? So be about that, and take care. Talk to you soon. stopped this a long time ago. Why is it still running?